Hello students, welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In today's video, we are going to discuss about a recent summit that has been concluded in China that is called as Forum on China-Africa Cooperation Summit. So what is the significance of this summit? What is the outcome, and why China is trying to gather around the large number of African countries and to what extent it wants to cooperate with them. So let us try to understand this in more detail. So first of all, to give the background, the Chinese President Xi Jinping in the recently held Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, also called as FOCAC Summit, has announced that China will invest around $51 billion and it will fund the African countries, and this was announced at this 9th edition of the summit. While explaining the use of $51 billion, China has said that it will support almost 30 large ticket infrastructure projects across the entire African continent. This amounts to roughly 360 billion yuan to be offered as financial assistance. Now, the move comes as China is also trying to at the same time scale down its big ticket infrastructure investment amid pressures on its own economy that it has witnessed in the recent years. So if we take a look at FOCAC was basically a corporation that was established in year 2000, and the main goal of this cooperation was to formalize the strategic partnership between the China and African nation. A strategic partnership basically refers to a significant partnership that exists either bilaterally or multilaterally across different countries. Such partnership basically means that through cooperation, both countries or regions want to use their resources in such a way that it can benefit both of the regions. So a summit is conducted every 3 years after the this establishment of FOCAC, and with a host alternating between China and African members. That means next year it will be some African countries which is a member of FOCAC is where the summit will take place. If you look at the membership of this organization, it counts today to 53 African nations as its member, and the entire continent except one small country that we have is Eswatini. It is not a member of the FOCAC. The reason is because Eswatini has adopted a diplomatic approach where it actually formalizes relationship with Taiwan and believes that Taiwan is the real representative of the people of China. So it is also going against Beijing's One China policy, and that is obviously China has not included Eswatini as a member of the summit or member of this organization. Now, interestingly, India also agrees with the Beijing's One China policy, where it accepts Tibet and Taiwan as a part of China, and thus has a diplomatic relationship with the government of PRC, that is the People's Republic of China. On the other hand, Taiwan, which considered itself the real representative of the Chinese public, is known by the official name of ROC, that is Republic of China. Now, the African Union Commission, more importantly, which is an organization which is based on the continent-wide scale of Africa and is tasked with ensuring cooperation and economic integration across its member countries, is also the member of FOCAC. So as we can see, the membership of this organization expands throughout the entire African continent. If you take a look at the 9th edition of meeting that was held recently, African leaders will engage in bilateral talks with China on both political as well as economic cooperation. And the importance of this summit we can understand from the fact that the summit had taken place over a period of 3 days. As far as the theme of the summit is concerned, this year's theme is joining hands to advance modernization and build a high-level China-African community with a shared future. Now, theme is something that changes every year, denoting the importance and significance of what is the area of cooperation. Now, as far as China is concerned, the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister actually has released a statement that FOCAC will be the largest diplomatic event that China has held in the recent years, and also, interestingly, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has been invited as a special guest. Now, as far as this 9th edition of meeting is concerned, the main goal that the countries wanted to achieve was to address the state governance, industrialization, agricultural upgradation, and improved cooperation over China's infrastructure financing via BRI, that is its flagship initiative Belt and Road Initiative that spans across multiple countries and even across multiple continents. So if we try to understand historically at how the relationship of Africa and China has evolved. So if you go back to the past somewhere in the 1950s, when many of the African nations are struggling and fighting against the colonization, since China at that time was a communist nation, it also stood for the decolonization of African countries and supported their liberation movement and established bilateral trade relations. Now, this went on for a long period of time, and due to such bonhomie that China enjoyed with African nations, in the 1970s, China was able to reap the benefit of it. Because in the 1970s, it was able to rally the support, to get the support of most of the African nations and displaced Taiwan as the official representative of China in global forums, including United Nations Security Council. Then China kept on increasing its trade relations with Africa, and in 2009, then China emerged as Africa's largest bilateral trading partner with a trade volume standing somewhere at around $282 billion. China has been able to maintain its position as the largest trading partner since then. That means almost we can say 15 years has passed. Now, China gets, as far as the import and export data if we take into consideration, China exports almost we can say 20% of these. China imports 20% of regional exports of Africa, that largely is made up of metals, mineral products and fuel, and almost 16% of African import is coming from China, which largely includes goods, Chinese manufactured goods, electronics items as well as machinery, both electronics as well as electrical machinery. So here also they have a significant partnership. So if we talk about the evolution further, Africa is also an integral partner in the Belt and Road Initiative that tries to connect overall multiple countries and continents, both by land as well as maritime route, passing from China or originating from China, passing through the Asian nations, then through Europe and then to Africa. So it intends to establish what we can call as a cross-border economic, political and cultural relationship, which it believes will be similar to a Silk Road relationship that existed long time ago, both using land and sea route. A big draw for African nations seeking Chinese fund has been the absence of constraints linked to the environmental or human rights. Now, most of the time, when organizations such as IMF, World Bank or other Western economy lend money to Africa, they make sure that African country or that particular African country is not violating or is fulfilling the human rights obligations. And this is something that is not a constraint when China provides fund for them. So for many African countries which have been allegedly involved in violation of human rights or environmental violation, or we can say do not take into account environmental factors in its development policies, for them it becomes easier to get loans from China as compared to the international institutions. That also act as an added advantage for the Chinese investment and trade relationship with the African continent. If we talk about the significance of the summit is taking place at a time when China is experiencing a prolonged economic slowdown, especially after the pandemic of 2020. In this context, the concerns about loan default also has been raised in the China, because if you take example, in 2020, Zambia, which is a small African country, defaulted on a loan which was valued at $3.5 billion. While Ghana defaulted on most of its $30 billion loan that was extended to it as external debt in 2022. And it is due to this reason the President Xi Jinping has changed his policy, and now rather than investing in a big ticket infrastructure, he wants to narrow the country's investment portfolio and want to invest in what he considered as small and beautiful projects. So it hopes to sell advanced green technologies as well, which Chinese firms have heavily invested in. So these are something where China and Africa will try to cooperate in the future. However, this is something that is not in line with Africa's expectation. As far as the reports goes, African partners are expected to seek more lending than what China is trying to give. And Chinese lending plummeted. We try to understand why it is so. Obviously, because if you look at the year 2016, when China was having a massive amount of funding, it funded almost $28 billion project in Africa. This plummeted to $1 billion in 2022. Obviously, there we have to take into account the effect of pandemics as well. However, since then it has risen marginally, and in 2023 it stood up to $4.6 billion. But still, it is almost, we can say, 6 to 7 times lesser than what the African countries were getting from China in the past. So this is something, a figure that African countries want to again reach back to. Now, if you take example of Kenya, which is a major East African country, it is seeking funding for multiple infrastructure projects, including the completion of transnational standard gauge railway, through which Kenya was to be linked with its neighbor country Uganda. This project was initially helped or supported by China, but since 2020, China has stopped funding this project. So this is something that also Kenya is looking forward to. Now, this comes despite its massive debt to China, which has triggered country-wide protests in Kenya, because obviously there is a risk of a debt trap, something that we have seen in the past. For example, the debt trap in which Sri Lanka was caught with China after taking a lot of investment and a lot of external debt. Another concern from countries like South Africa is the balance of trade currently is in China's favor. Now, balance of trade basically means the import minus export. So in this case, China is exporting to South Africa to a much more larger value as compared to what South Africa is exporting to China. So this is something that is also a matter of concern, where many countries want to have a trade surplus. However, if you try to understand the current summit that has taken place, basically it is not only a summit to extend economic and what we can call as financial cooperation. It is also a summit that is trying to give a political message. And what kind of political message? We can understand that in the inaugural events of the FOCAC summit, China has extended a red carpet welcome for the delegates, and this has been something which has been, this is something that has been noticed. Now, through this kind of welcome and also through the introductory statements that has been given by the Chinese leaders, China is trying to emerge, or basically reiterates its position that it is a developing country. And this is something that they're trying to show the similarity they have with the African nations. Not only that, China is also trying to bond with African countries as victims of Western imperialism. And this is a message which has been welcomed by the visitors, that means African countries delegates as well. So economic, financial and political cooperation is something that China is trying to achieve through this summit in the future. So that is all about this particular video. I hope you understood the significance of the FOCAC summit and overall details around it.